This is the Molotov cocktail. This was the war where it was first used on a massive scale. November 30th, 1939. The Finno-Soviet border. With the rumbling vibrations of machinery, an armored unit made up of dozens of Soviet 26 light tanks was slowly advancing toward the defensive positions ahead. At this time, Finland's total national military force was no more than 340,000, with only 32 tanks. The Soviet side, on the other hand, had committed 450,000 troops, 6,000 armored vehicles, and 3,800 combat aircraft to this war, and Finland had almost no weapons that could effectively counter these armored units. Facing such a steel torrent, the Finnish soldiers tightly clutched not rifles, but glass bottles filled with a viscous, thick, brownish liquid. Wrapped around the mouth of the bottle was a cloth strip soaked in tar. Just then, the commander gave the order in a low voice. "Set your targets! Lock on to the engine compartments!" As the first tank drew closer, a soldier leaped to his feet and with all his might, hurled the glass bottle forward. The bottle smashed against the tank's deck, instantly shattering. Flames rapidly spread to the engine compartment. Thick black smoke poured out from the tank's every crevice. The tank was immediately disabled. Right after, from the trenches, 2 more of the same glass bottles flew out in succession. 2 other tanks were also engulfed in a sea of flames. The narrow forest road made it impossible for the remaining tanks to turn around in time. The entire armored column was brought to a complete halt. By dawn, 14 Soviet tanks had been successfully destroyed, and yet the Finnish unit hadn't suffered a single casualty. The Finnish soldiers named this homemade weapon the Molotov cocktail, also often called the Molotov bottle. But what no one knew was that this seemingly crude weapon was no makeshift invention, but the result of a Finnish captain spending 2 years gradually refining an initial concept into a combat-ready weapon. The story goes back to 1937. A 34-year-old Captain Kuitunen sat in his cramped office, a report from Spain lying on his desk. The report clearly stated that on the streets of Madrid, Republican soldiers, using only glass bottles filled with gasoline, had successfully stopped the nationalist tank assault. This weapon was called a gasoline bomb. It was simple in design, often used in emergencies, but could occasionally produce unexpected results. Kuitunen read the report over and over again, and finally made up his mind to systematically improve this weapon. His goal was to create a standardized military weapon with stable performance that could inflict maximum damage on armored targets. He then applied for research materials and set up a dedicated testing facility, thus beginning a 2-year-long development process. The first problem he encountered during development was the ratio of the fuel mixture. Although pure gasoline burns at a high temperature, it would slide off metal surfaces like water. After a glass bottle hit a tank, most of the fuel would run off before it even had a chance to burn. Kuitunen tried adding tar to the gasoline. This thick, black substance allowed the fuel mixture to stick firmly to the armor's surface, but he soon discovered that the proportion of tar was crucial. If the proportion was too high, the mixture's adhesion was strong, but its burning speed was very slow. If the proportion was too low, the flame was intense, but lasted for an extremely short time. Through countless trials and adjustments, he finally determined the optimal formula: 1 part tar mixed with 3 parts gasoline, with a suitable amount of wood alcohol added. The cooled fuel mixture burned at a higher temperature, and the dense smoke it produced was even more intense, capable of forming a suffocating smokescreen that forced the tank's crew members to evacuate. After solving the fuel problem, the next hurdle to overcome was improving the ignition method. Previously, when soldiers lit the cloth strip in the bottle's neck, the flame would expose the thrower's position, allowing the enemy to be quickly alerted. Moreover, during the throw, a gust of wind could extinguish the flame. Even if the bottle hit the tank and shattered, the unlit fuel would be uselessly spilled on the ground. At the same time, wind and rain would also severely impact the effectiveness of the ignition. Kuitunen urgently needed a more reliable ignition solution. He first tried using storm matches. These were long wooden matches designed for harsh conditions. He would use tape to fix 2 of them to the sides of the bottle, strike them, and then immediately throw it. When the bottle shattered, the fuel would then ignite. While this improvement shortened the thrower's exposure time, the storm matches of that era could still potentially be blown out by the wind. And so, Kuitunen decided to take advantage of white phosphorus's property of rapidly igniting upon contact with air, sealing the white phosphorus in small glass ampules. These were fastened to the outside of the bottle with rubber bands. This way, when the bottle shattered on impact, the glass ampule would also break. Once the white phosphorus came into contact with the air, it would ignite automatically, even in complete darkness. All you could hear was the sound of shattering glass, followed by an instant, raging fire. On November 30th, 1939, the curtain abruptly rose on the Winter War. The Soviet military offensive swept in like a thunderstorm. 7 infantry divisions simultaneously crossed the border. An army of 200,000 strong advanced steadily toward Finland's core defensive position, the Mannerheim Line. Before every charge, intense artillery fire would bombard the frozen ground for hours on end. The truth was, the Finnish defenders faced an extreme disparity in forces. On some fronts, the ratio of troops was as high as 1 to 10. The first week of the war's fighting was exceptionally brutal. Soviet tanks broke through the front lines with almost no effective resistance. The Finnish forces had so few anti-tank guns, they couldn't possibly form an effective defensive barrier. The infantry units were forced into a hasty retreat across the vast, snowy landscape. A large amount of military equipment was left behind on the battlefield. By December 10th, the Soviet army had advanced 25 kilometers into the Finnish heartland. The Finnish army's cumulative casualties reached 8,000, a devastating loss. But now, strange things began to happen in the forests. Soviet marching columns started to frequently go missing. Like many of the Soviet troops who pursued the Finnish forces, they lost contact completely. The scouts sent out later eventually only found burnt military vehicles and the bodies of the fallen soldiers in the woods. Little did they know, this was a meticulously planned hunt by the Finnish ski troops, and the weapons in their hands were none other than those seemingly insignificant glass bottles. Just as Molotov gave a radio address threatening that bombs would continue to fall on Finnish territory, the Finnish soldiers sarcastically named the incendiary bombs they used against Soviet armored units the Molotov cocktail. From then on, the name Molotov cocktail began to spread. Within just a few weeks, it went from the Finnish trenches to the headlines of major publications around the world. As the power of this simple incendiary bomb and its low cost became widely recognized, Finland continuously ramped up production. In January of 1940, production reached 80,000 units, and by February, it had climbed to 120,000. The total output during the entire war exceeded 450,000 units. Simple instructions were printed on the label of each glass bottle. Before throwing, strike the windproof match. Aim for the tank's engine compartment or the turret joint. Throw from a concealed position within 25 meters. If the flames fail to spread properly, be ready to throw a second one immediately. At the time, the Soviet Union had 6,000 armored vehicles, while Finland had 500,000 of these glass bottles. In the dense forests of Karelia, Finnish soldiers were about to prove with their actions that these seemingly ordinary containers could also become the deadly weapon that destroyed the steel tide. In early 1940, along the Rate Road, the wind was bone-chilling. Officer Silas Vuo's gaze fell upon the battle map. The balance of forces displayed on it would make any military commander uneasy. His 9th Division had only 11,500 men, while the approaching Soviet army consisted of 2 full divisions, with a total strength reaching 48,000 men, 4 times that of the Finnish army. The enemy was advancing steadily along the Rate Road. This narrow road cut through 50 kilometers of wilderness. Their strategic objective was obvious: to cut Finland in half. According to conventional military deployment, Silas Vuo should have retreated to avoid the risk, but instead, he made a surprising decision to launch an offensive. The Rate Road was a single-lane track that ran through a dense forest. The Soviet army had to advance in a single-file line. They could neither spread out into a battle formation, nor did they have enough space to maneuver. Silas Vuo keenly identified this key weakness. If the road was blocked at multiple points, the entire Soviet column would be trapped, unable to advance or retreat. On January 5th, Finnish ski troops quietly moved into their preset positions. At dawn, they launched a surprise attack, using Molotov cocktails to relentlessly attack the trapped Soviet vehicles. The tanks at the vanguard and rear of the enemy column were the first to be engulfed in flames. The vehicle convoy was left completely immobilized. A soldier charged bravely towards a stationary 28 tank, bravely charged, and hurled the glass bottle in his hand. The bottle landed, shattered instantly, and flames erupted. The tank's fuel tank soon exploded. A member of the Soviet army, engulfed in flames, climbs out of a hatch, staggers 3 steps, and then collapses into the snow. For 7 consecutive days, the Finnish army employed flexible hit-and-run tactics. They repeatedly struck out, leaving Soviet soldiers in the open fields to suffer from the bitter cold. Tanks gradually ran out of fuel, and commanders completely lost contact with their troops. In the end, the Soviet 163rd and 44th Divisions were wiped out. By the end of this battle, the number of Soviet soldiers killed had reached 27,000, while the Finnish side only suffered 900 casualties. They also captured 43 tanks, 71 field guns, and 260 trucks. The total value of this equipment was even greater than Finland's entire annual military budget. The number of tanks destroyed by these simple glass bottles even surpassed the record of Finland's regular artillery units. However, the Soviet Union had an endless supply of troops and equipment. The core issue at the time wasn't whether Finland could win the entire war, but rather how long this resistance could last. The time was now February of 1940. The focus of the war shifted to the Mannerheim Line. A battle that was originally planned to end within 2 weeks ended up costing the Soviet Union the heavy price of 150,000 casualties. Far away in Berlin, Hitler was watching all of this closely and reassessed the Soviet Union's military strength. On February 11th, the Soviet army launched its final offensive. A fierce artillery barrage lasting 12 hours meant that the Finnish positions were hit by more shells in a single morning than they had been during the entire war up to that point. Bunkers collapsed one after another, and all communication lines were cut. This time, the Soviets had changed their tactics. Infantry advanced ahead of the armored units, responsible for clearing out anti-tank personnel, while also coordinating airstrikes. Attacking the Finnish reserve forces, they no longer let tanks charge into the forests alone. Clearly, the Soviet army had learned a profound lesson from its previous failures. On February 15th, Soviet tanks successfully broke through the Mannerheim Line. The Finnish troops began an orderly retreat to their secondary positions. On March 5th, the Soviet army reached Vyborg, Finland's second-largest city. Its defense system was on the verge of collapse. The army's ammunition was depleted, and the soldiers were long exhausted. The Finnish government was facing utter annihilation. Although they had inflicted 321,000 casualties on the Soviet army, in the end, it was impossible to change the reality of the immense disparity in strength between the two sides. On March 12th, the Moscow Peace Treaty was formally signed. Finland ceded 11% of its territory, and 400,000 civilians were forced to evacuate their homes. But Finland did successfully preserve its national independence. This 105-day winter war finally came to a close, with 70,000 Finnish casualties and 321,000 Soviet casualties. And the Molotov cocktail, designed by Captain Kuitunen, achieved astonishing results in the war. Finnish records show that this weapon destroyed or disabled over 400 Soviet tanks, a number greater than all other anti-tank weapons combined, completely fulfilling its original design purpose. But the story of this weapon didn't end there. A few months later, resistance movements in occupied European countries began to imitate its production methods. The powerful resilience of this simple weapon had already far outlasted the war that gave birth to it.